Welcome, Raymond.
Hello.
How are you?
Um, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Yeah. Thank
Welcome.
you for the welcome, and I'm good. I'm just getting situated. I'm trying to get my.
Me too. I'm going to play a few videos before while we wait
Okay.
to come on.
Okay. Great. So
Okay.
let me get myself together.
I don't know. Now it's gone back to launch meeting. Why is that? Okay. Um. Screen sharing. Here's some videos that I picked out for us today. All right. Here's kind of a hokey video on Palestine done by students in some college. So
Palestine,
kind of
the
interesting.
land of the poem, Palestinians, the poetry of the land. If asked to identify where Palestine is on a map, could you find it? Here it is. Let's take a closer look.
Oh wow.
With the Mediterranean Sea to the west, Palestine is in a small but prime location for trade, commerce, and travel. However, Palestine itself is much more complicated than this map leads on. Palestine was used as a crossroads of the world, where people would meet, learn, trade goods, languages, and religions, as shown in the trade diagram presented. It was the birthplace of the three Abrahamic faiths, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Though broken into a class structure like most of the world, Palestinian society was an overall collective culture, meaning everyone helps everyone else in the village. The land preserved their ancient customs and is still a very important part of their culture. Palestinians signify themselves as one with the land. However, today, Palestinians are left with no land to call their own, leaving many no choice but to leave their homes behind or continue to fight for what was once theirs for over 4,000 years. The Balfour Declaration, put into effect in 1917, was penned by British parliamentarians in order to appease the growing Zionist party. This resulted in the dominance of Zionism in Palestine by allowing them to establish an Israeli nation state. The document forced Palestinians to confide to Israeli forces or flee the only home they ever knew. The confusing language of the document, such as, quote, clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, end quote, left many wondering what this document was really about. Seeing that the British was trying to allude to all parties involved, no clear solution was actually presented in the 50-word paragraph. This has now left Palestine in a 70-year state of unknown and oppression. Nakba, which translates to catastrophe, is used to refer to the intergenerational trauma still affecting Palestinians today, whereby 750,000 Palestinians were moved from their ancient homeland by violent force in the hands of Zionists backed by the United Kingdom and the United States. This diagram shows the removal and takeover of Palestinian land to Israeli territory. Environment issues. Palestine was known as the land of milk and honey, and it was once a flourishing paradise. Now it is poisoned, nearly a wasteland by the Israelis due to their shelling and airstrikes of the land and dumping raw sewage and other harmful contagions in the rivers. The Israelis have even covered and locked up the wells that Palestinians need for access to clean water, effectively controlling all water supplies. Economic issues. Today, with the Israeli Defense Force occupancy on the rise in Palestinian boards, a barrier has been formed which created severe limitations on the rise or success of the economic policies in Palestine. With land, air, and sea blockades and regulations put into place on fishing and cattle, Palestinian people are left with little to no hope in being able to take care of and provide for their families. As shown, a complex web of checkpoints and roadblocks make it difficult for Palestinians to travel within their own territories due to the Israeli Defense Force. Human rights issues. Today, Palestinians are forced to use a different colored passport than the Israeli people. They're also designated a different colored license plate in an attempt by the Israeli Defense Force to single them out and delay their travels to and from work inside Palestinian walls and out. Palestinians are being treated and handled as less than for no legal or factual reasons that are completely outside of their control. Some possible solutions to the 70-year past to present problem include, but are not limited to, a one-state solution for Israelis and Palestinians together, a so-called two-state solution that poses even more unanswerable questions, or even confederation or annexation by Jordan. Thank you for viewing our Palestine and Palestinian presentation. We hope we are able to shine a well-needed light on the topic and issues of Palestine.
Okay, hi everybody. Welcome everybody. Raymond is here and Frank. Hi Frank.
Hello, hello, Jackie.
We finally get to see each other.
Yeah,
And Raymond, thank you for joining us. And Charlotte from the awesome group British Voice for Peace. They are amazing group, Brooklyn for Peace. They're really awesome. And Sarah's here and Zaid. So it's so good to see everybody. And that little piece that I showed just while people were getting on was actually done as a college student project. So I think it's kind of hopeful that college students are producing this kind of research despite everything that's going on. I wanted to start out. I know we have some other poets who are coming on, especially our beloved Farid and Naomi. I wanted to play this awesome poetry by Muhammad Asaf, Palestinian poet.
على عهدي على ديني على أرض تلاقيني أنا لأهلي أنا فديهم أنا دمي فلسطيني 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 أنا دمي فلسطيني على ديني على أرض تلاقيني أنا لأهلي أنا فديهم والله أنا دمي فلسطيني 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 أنا دمي فلسطيني
the fact that Jordan and Frank, as you know, that poetry is sung most of the time. So this parties, people get drunk and start singing poetry. It's just so fabulous that I miss it so much. Richard from Lebanon, welcome. You're here, Habibi. How are you? Finally, unmute yourself. One of my dear friends who lived in Amman for several years, who's now living with the Druze in Lebanon in the forest somewhere, in some forest village.
By
So
the way, that song, Dam Palestinian, there's that great video you've probably seen where he won the Arab Idol contest out of
yeah,
Egypt.
yeah,
It's a
yeah,
great video. Yeah.
yeah. Um, and here's another song while we're still waiting for people and to get us in the mood. This is very profoundly moving and disturbing. The other song was kind of upbeat. This one is really by a woman, a young woman, Rafif Ziad, Ziada. It's very disturbing, called Shades of Anger.
I wrote this poem when we were doing a direct action at my university, and there were Palestinian citizens and Israeli soldiers, and and I'm very petty about these things, so I said I will only be a Palestinian. I refuse to be a settler or a soldier. So I was lying on the ground, and this guy came and kicked me in the guts and said, "You deserve to be raped before you have your terrorist children." At the time, I said nothing, but then I wrote this poem for this young
Oh
gentleman.
my God.
اسمحوا لي أن أتكلم بلساني العربي قبل أن يحتلوا لغتي أيضا. Allow me to speak my Arab tongue before they occupy my language as well. Allow me to speak my mother tongue before they colonize her memory as well. I am an Arab woman of color, and we come in all shades of anger. All my grandfather ever wanted to do was wake up at dawn and watch my grandmother kneel and pray in a village hidden between Jaffa and Haifa. My mother was born under an olive tree on a soil they say is no longer mine, but I will cross their barriers, their checkpoints, their damn apartheid walls, and return to my homeland. I am an Arab woman of color, and we come in all shades of anger. And did you hear my sister screaming yesterday as she gave birth at a checkpoint with Israeli soldiers looking between her legs for their next demographic threat? Called her baby girl Janine. And did you hear Amni Mona screaming behind their prison bars as they tear gassed her cell? We are returning to Palestine. I am an Arab woman of color, and we come in all shades of anger. But you tell me this womb inside of me will only bring you your next terrorist. Beard wearing, gun waving, towel head, sand nigger. You tell me I send my children out to die, but those are your copters, your F-16s in our skies. And let's talk about this terrorism business for a second. Wasn't it the CIA that killed Allende and Lumumba? And who trained Osama in the first place? My grandparents didn't run around like clowns with white capes and white hoods on their heads lynching black people. I am an Arab woman of color, and we come in all shades of anger. So who's that brown woman screaming in a demonstration? Sorry, should I not scream? I forgot to be your every Orientalist dream. Genie in a bottle, belly dancer, harem girl, soft-spoken Arab woman. Yes, master. No, master. Thank you for the peanut butter sandwiches raining down on us from your F-16s, master. Yes, my liberators are here to kill my children and call them collateral damage. I am an Arab woman of color, and we come in all shades of anger. So let me just tell you, this womb inside of me will only bring you your next rebel. She'll have a rock in one hand and a Palestinian flag in the other. I am an Arab woman of color. Beware, beware my anger.
So I just wanted to introduce our poetry slam today with those two amazing poems. I am was very moved by them when I saw them, and I think the intensity of the language and the feeling is just begins to approach what people are feeling as we speak today. So I wanted to start out with um, listen, having your own poetry, and then we'll have some discussion. So, Rain, you were here first. Would you like to read some your poetry? But you have to unmute yourself. You're muted. We can't hear you. So unmute yourself, please.
Um, it sounded like you called on me. Is that correct?
I did.
Okay. Sure. Let me. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
So this piece is called Sugar Hill Playdate
Sure.
versus Oslo Peace Process. 35-pound question mark, 3-foot exclamation point. Doesn't cringe at loud sounds or pee his bed behind nightmares. Cameron, my 3-year-old Sugar Hill neighbor's an old soul. I'm honored that he refers to me as my friend Raymond. Cameron's mommy's a surgeon studying for her boards. His granny's a history professor writing another book. So I'm awarded a Cameron Playdate. Cameron has every truck ever made. He knows precisely each truck's function. He teaches truck 101 to anyone in earshot. He warns work will not begin before his bright yellow hard hats jammed over jet black curls. He buckles his tool belt low and tight. He studied styles and moves of the working class, has them down pat. Cameron creates tasks for each truck, then schools me on how the crane of one truck works. He doesn't trust me with the trucks. Blessed, he believes mommy and granny will protect him from scary things, feed and hydrate him after he plays hard, read and sing sleepy time lullabies, enforcing peaceful naps as the Sandman invades. So I spare Cameron fractured fairy tales of ambulances twisted into burning, bloody metal hulks, pieces of cloth, shoes, drivers, and assistants. I spare him fractured fairy tales from Oz, natives driving zigzag routes round a Frankenstein scar dissecting their homeland, where his trucks would have different color license plates and stop at checkpoints manned by teenage thugs eager to cast lead. Traveling Oz by truck, Cameron might see caterpillars crunching toys, houses, olive trees, crushing dreams. He might see fools flying featherless birds, shitting shrapnel and white fire. He might hear overloaded donkey carts squealing, moaning like mothers of itty bitty bloody bodies piled on them. Bodies later stuffed in ice cream freezers to slow their rotting. Bodies so shredded, even Cameron's surgeon mommy couldn't put their tiny arms, legs, and heads back together again. I spare my friend fractured fairy tales, crushing trucks like his.
Oh, wow. Beautiful. Very
Bravo.
beautiful. Wow, what a contrast.
Jackie, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay, I just had a mic. That was whoa, powerful.
Thank you.
The contrast between the
Hmm.
toys and then, when you get into the death and the destruction, that was profound, Raymond. Thank you so
You
much.
brought in some historical stuff, fractured fairy tales on American TV. Amazing how you integrated that
Oh, thank
into
you.
this poem and talking about children. Wow, that was really
Have you
amazing.
published it?
Uh,
I,
yeah, I am at Black Agenda Report. It's been there. It's been at what is it called? Dissident Voice, and then it's been in a couple of anthologies. But I'm still waiting to publish my volume of poetry.
Well, hang
it's
it in.
hard. It's hard to get a publisher for poetry. It's really
Well,
Right.
even great poetry. It's really hard.
if Naomi Quill comes on, she might be interested. She's published for Reed Guitar's books, poetry, and so she's a good connection for you. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you. Thank you for having me, Jacqueline. Appreciate it.
Where are you located?
Well, normally 147th and St. Nicholas in Harlem, normally, but at this moment in Oakland, California.
Oakland, yeah.
That's a good change,
The
right?
two
Well,
places where I hang, I was in Harlem last night, and
mm,
Oakland, the Bay Area, that's right around the corner where I was raised. I
Yeah.
was in there a lot.
oh, really?
Oakland, California,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Back in New York.
yeah. I think I will be back for the Dissidents Arts Festival, or the what do you call it? The Vision Fest, in July. So,
Great. Okay, well, I look forward to you returning and maybe meeting you in person. That was so great. Thank you.
oh, well, thank you so much.
And Frank, did you want to read your? I know you just read a poem at a recently, your new poetry, and you're publishing a book of poetry. So maybe you can share some of your poems with us, please.
Yeah. Jackie, you remember Ibrahim's Peace House in the Mount of Olives where we always stayed?
Right, of course.
There's a guy by the name of Lance Wolf, a Jewish American activist who enlightened me about so many things about reality. And he was always there behind the computer logistics, but he helped us activists a million times over. So when he died, it was kind of a combination of circumstances. I was there later, and I just had to find out, and I just woke up one day and I felt so depressed. I had to write this poem down. I think I would have exploded. It's called Lance. I never thought I'd be doing this, writing a poem about you, because I assumed you'd always be here in this place where tears glisten long after the last hautboy has sung its sad melody in the dim evening light of Ibrahim's guest house here in the Mount of Olives. I miss you, so desperate to feel your presence that this night I had to write this or perish, overflowing with grief. The first thing I remembered was your ranting and raving, your clarion calls questioning all my comfortable beliefs, people I had blindly believed in. I was an Obama apologist until you wiped my arguments away with revelations of his incompetence, broken promises, kowtowing to Israel, to capitalist interest groups, abandoning closure of the ignominious Guantanamo Bay, disastrous Middle East foreign policy, his power and money hunger, all that I had previously chosen to ignore. So you became the first and last person I turned to, a litmus test for everything, from Israeli-Palestinian relations, my peace and freedom demonstrations, to the infamous Jewish settlers and the Palestinian Authority traitors assisting the Israeli persecutors like the Vichy brown shirts collaborating with the Nazis in France in World War II. Your wisdom pulled me to earth and even helped me resolve my complicated women problems. Everything. Your fervent desire for peace and freedom, your love of humanity and hate of double talking, bribe taking, self-interesting politicians, and the pro-settler ethnic cleansing inflicted by the Israeli government on Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, all this helped fuel my freedom marches. What I most needed was accurate information and lots of it, especially as an activist in this place, in the ever-changing Holy Land. You were always there with sensitive thoughts, open views, unshackled by rules. I love you, Guy. I need you. You'd be waiting for me downstairs, the cool morning breeze wafting gently through your wiry brown hair, white on the fringes, while drinking your tea. Slightly bent over the corner table, you'd be munching on kamaj bread. In the kitchen, shaggy white mustache drooping over right narrow lips, scraggly beard covering chin and neck, hints of light brown embedded in white. I would saunter in with eyes half closed, after morning prayers and meditations, failing to completely recoup from the day before the demonstrations for peace and freedom in the West Bank. You would simply hand me a cup of strong Palestinian coffee, your flaming hawk eyes following my hand as it reached out, then jumping to my eyes, a subtle twitch flattening the top of your eyes meant a smile that your mouth didn't reflect, but I knew that was your way. After quickly downing the strong coffee with a liberal dose of grounds, I would stuff breads soaked with olive oil and dipped in satar into my mouth. And before the grounds had time to settle, we'd hug for eternity. As I made my way to the door, you'd always say, "Be careful," quite facetiously, before I plodded back to the Damascus Gate, then to the West Bank or Jerusalem's old city for demonstrations, interfaith events, for freedom, for life. Sometimes even in the face of Kalashnikovs, Palestinian collaborators, the M16s of the Israeli soldiers, or tear gas, unlimited arms and weapons paid for by the US tax dollars. Harassment, arrest, detention, sometimes dragged away from the ruthless occupiers by Palestinian doctors and ambulance drivers who quickly patched me up, even stitched me with sewing thread, or slapped an oxygen mask on my hacking, sputtering mouth. But nothing compared to my friend Giuliano Mercamis, another activist extraordinaire who courageously with his mother Arna founded the Freedom Theater in the Jenin refugee camp, who took 5 shots of steel to the gut through a window of despair and parachuted in a car, his baby son on his lap, turning back to you in the open door before I lumbered down the stairs to the small passage leading to the street below. I turned to you saying, "You're in the trenches. You live here, my friend, every day. You're the one, Lance." As I walked to the Arab bus a couple of blocks away during my last stay at Ibrahim's while you were still alive, I mumbled to myself, thinking of you. "You incredible crackpot. You dared to speak even the ugly truth, not fearing to yell explosively in the middle of a room filled with bobble-headed Jewish peaceniks. You challenged them, their hypocrisy of crying brotherhood with Palestinians while still supporting the cruel occupation, the treacherous confiscation of Palestinian lands, the brutal blockade of Gaza, all with a smile. You sometimes didn't make sense with your crazy bellowing, but you do now more than ever. Stepping into the street, I was greeted by usual clacking madness of honking horns intertwining with myriad street peddlers, Palestinian youth playing soccer, girls wearing their multicolored headscarves, returning from school, cars whizzing by near the bus stop near Salman al-Farsi Street, where I stood waiting for my ride to Jerusalem's old city, where Al-Aqsa and the Dome of the Rock Mosque Loom, the Western Wall, had witnessed centuries of wailing, where Jesus had carried the cross to his crucifixion. Down the stretch, I looked for a bus, but none in sight. One finally poked through the maze of vehicles and jaywalkers coming from the other side, bearing down on me. Stopping next to me with a slight screech, I climbed the stairs after "Salam alaikum," and dropping 5 shekels into the waiting hands of the driver, I was in and on my way to Khalil, Hebron. They labeled me crazy during my ranting and raving demonstrations on the Hebron streets that day. When I returned to Ibrahim's house in Al-Quds, Jerusalem, you were standing next to the door with a wrinkled brow, and placing a hand on my shoulder, you grumbled, "Got to talk with you." You had obviously already heard about Hebron. I cringed, waiting for harsh words, that I had done something wrong again, another blasphemy, desecrating the sacred soil of this religious labyrinth. Instead, you wrinkled your brow, smoothed over when you laughed and said, now we've got something in common. You always supported me because you believed in me as I believed in you, always. But you're dead. Can I still hear your words? Be careful. Well, I'll tell you what. Well, for you, I'll make sure I am not careful. Not anymore. That's over. In my comfort zone of illusions and delusions, you help to strip them away, but you're not around, bro, to hug. This was a dream. The next morning, I lay in my sleeping bag with these words scribbled on a piece of paper, slightly crumpled and splotched with yesterday's coffee grounds, an air pungent with cardamom, the spicy scent of the Arab world. Muazzin from four corners of Jerusalem began echoing their pleas to come and pray, and the first light blazed over the distant hills. I got up and glanced out my window. The morning dew shimmered in the trees. Haze shrouded the Mount of Olives. The steam was rising, curly over your tweed mustache, because your face is there. It's there. Thank you.
Oh, wow, Frank. Very, very- wow, could vision every step of the way. For those of you who don't know, Ibrahim Al-Hawi has a rest house in the Mount of Olives that's reminds me of like the 60s and 70s in the Lower East Side. You know, anybody could come in, stay there, pay what you wish. There are always all kinds of interesting, eccentric, sometimes annoying, sometimes inspiring people. And people would sit around. They were from all over the world, from Japan, Ukraine, America, and it was actually not too many Americans in that rest house, which I was relieved about, you know, because I'm not that fond of American tourists. And it was Ibrahim is like an icon. He's I think 80 now or 81.
I don't know. He's up there.
They keep trying to tear his house down, and he you know you what the name of the game and what goes on is that you have to make a repair on your house, or you want to expand it because you know you want your family there, and so you want to put a little extension on. You have to apply for a permit from the Israelis, and of course the Israelis never give you the permit. So, you know, it goes on for years and years, and finally people get fed up and they just, you know, make the repair. You know, because their water boiler is not working, or you know, something's broken, roof has to be repaired. And then as soon as you make the repair, they come and they fine you. And either you go to court, or Ibrahim's been in court. They wanted some incredible, like $10,000 from him. He was so stressed that he actually had a heart attack in one of his court appearances. But fortunately, I was able to help him out. One of my friends in Westbeth here is Lily Rivlin. You may recognize her last name, Rivlin. Anybody recognize that name? It's the president of Israel. Her cousin is the president of Israel. And Lily's kind of a leftist. She did a film that was banned at Jewish film festivals for years about Jewish and Palestinian mothers and wives getting together and grieving the loss of their sons and husbands or whatever, called Can You Hear Us Now? And it was a very moving film. She interviewed women all over Israel and Palestine who had lost their men, you know, their sons, daughter, whatever. And she made this beautiful documentary, and it was banned in most Jewish film festivals. And finally, about 2 years ago, they showed it at the big Jewish film festival out in California. But so she's she's a very sympathetic person to Palestinians, and very embarrassed about the occupation. Anyhow, I contacted her and I said, look, you got to talk to your cousin. She's not particularly on good terms with him because she's kind of a leftist. And he is government. But
what's the title of the film?
Can You Hear Us Now?
Can You Hear Us Now?
Thank you. Yeah.
Something like that. Her name is Lily Rivlin, Relin. It's worth seeing. It's a very good film. Anyhow, so she did speak to her cousin about Ibrahim, and he was given a reduced fine and a reprieve or whatever. They're actually going to demolish his house. They were planning to demolish his house, and
You're the one who pretty much saved him then.
well,
Bravo.
not me,
Fantastic.
friend, Lily.
Well, your connection. I
Well,
want to announce though, if any of you want to travel, his peace house is still there, and the beauty, one of the most beautiful things that he used to do. When I was there were always an American or two. So there were there were Americans around, but they're activists or religious people or whatever. But what he did for me was amazing, because a lot of times I showed up, I had no money. I mean, I was a professor in the University of Paris, but you're paid piddlings pretty much. And I was going around, and he literally said, like, to everyone, it's based on donation. He doesn't even accept money directly from you. There's a little box downstairs. You put whatever you can.
yeah,
So he was feeding me twice a day, housing me. I even had my own room sometimes for something like, don't tell him I said this, but I think I paid sometimes $5 a day, $10, whatever I could afford. And he knew I didn't have money. He has a big heart, and everybody is, from all race, color, creed, religion, whatever planet. You're welcome there.
yeah. Norvi, welcome, Norvi Bullock. Thank you for joining.
Oh, thank you. Yes, hello.
So, yeah, Ibrahim is a phenomenon, and he's very famous. He's a friend of Bill Clinton. The Clintons knew him. He's traveled all
Oh
over.
God.
He was a friend of Gandhi. But he has no passport because the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, like, they have no papers. He has no passport.
His family's been there for hundreds of years, and from Bedouin roots, but he's considered kind of like he's a non-citizen. But they're also waiting for the East Jerusalem, because the mountain all is, as you know, is right next to the old city. East Jerusalem is earmarked for the new capital of the new Palestinian state. So some of them are waiting for that to happen to get Palestinian citizenship, but for the most part, they are simply refused any green card, citizenship, and if they want to travel, they have to have special permission, stuff like that.
Travel around the world all the time anyway, without a passport or any
Get special authorization. He's got to do it each time.
And there's pictures and photos of him with all these famous politicians are all around the place, and he's just a sweetheart. While somebody else is doing something, I'll ferret around and look for my photographs. I have photographs of him. I can show you. He's just really an angel, and God protect him. He survived a couple of heart attacks. He's been in and out of the hospital, and God bless him. But anyhow, so thank you, Frank. Can
I tell just a short story about him? The Israeli soldiers had arrived in the Mount of Olives, and it was over a killing of another killing of a Palestinian kid, I believe. And the Palestinians were angry, like the anger that was manifested in that poem we listened to. And they were out in droves, and they were confronting each other and about ready to have a confrontation. The Palestinians, of course, with their rocks. There were no arms other than rocks in their bodies, and Israeli soldiers with their guns and grenades and everything else, and they're shooting live bullets now. And Ibrahim el-Hawa braved this potential explosive situation and went in the middle of the two people and held on to the Palestinians and asked them, God, and there were so many kids in front, they were all going to get wiped out. He knew it. He said, look, come on, we're going to go to the mosque now and pray for the death of our brother. But, call this off. And then he went to the Israeli soldiers and said, look, let's just back off here. And he wasn't necessarily sweet talking. He said, back off. There's nobody here with arms. There's no problem, and he disintegrated this potential explosive situation with his courage. That happened several years ago.
Very gutsy and very strong. He's a small guy. He's not that tall. He's maybe 5'6". And I had gone on the peace bus to Gaza with him. And when we came back from the bus, the Israelis had just targeted that area of East Jerusalem for no reason with skunk water and tear gas. Now, if you don't know what skunk water is, you can take every horrible smell from dead things in your refrigerator and dead things you've ever seen on the road and multiply it 50 times. And that's
vomit, dead things, sewer water,
diarrhea, whatever.
That's what it smells like. When they spray it on you, you can't get it off your clothes. They do it on purpose because if you go back through the checkpoints, they can smell it. If I
Yeah.
went to the hospital, I had to throw this stuff away. I couldn't wash it.
No, you
And I
have
had
to,
to throw all that stuff that was, they skunk watered me away because if when I go back to Tel Aviv to the airport, they would have smelled it and probably apprehended me and questioned me and who knows what.
well, the skunk water, they also spray on the food stores.
Oh
So
God.
you have bakery, you can't smell it. And everybody has to
Wow.
close their shutters quickly so it doesn't get into your upholstery. Because if it gets into your upholstery, you got to throw your furniture out. Anyhow, I have asthma from 9/11 and my lungs are not that great. And so I got off the bus and I could hardly walk. I was, and he gave me his headscarf and wrapped it around me, and he literally almost carried me up that hill. And you know how it's a long hill, a long
I mean,
walk.
it's kafia, headscarves for women.
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm
Kafia.
Kafia, and strong that he could, and I don't weigh nothing, I'm pretty tall, but he was strong enough to get me up back into his house, and tough, and he was like, I'm not, don't be afraid, don't look at them, the soldiers were there, I was scared to death that we were going to get shot, and he said, don't even look at them, just keep going straight, and we got home safely, but it was really a scary situation. But you should go to and stay. If you go to Jerusalem, go and stay there. It's fabulous experience, really fabulous.
I got his email, his telephone. So if you're going to, that's where to go. And his house has been empty for a long time. There's no tourists hardly.
Yeah,
No
well,
one going to, and it's very safe. Believe me, very safe. Jews, Muslims, Christians. It's a safe place. It's a safe haven with him.
big family, and he speaks fluent Russian because his father was the the caretaker for the Russian Orthodox Church. So he was brought up, and his house was full of Russians when I went there. And they were all speaking Russian, and he's fluent in Russian because he grew up with the Russians, educated with the Russians. Anyhow, okay, Charlotte, do you have some poems you'd like to share with us?
No, I'm not a poet. I just came to listen and to share and support. So thank you.
Thanks.
You are a poem. This lady, ladies and gentlemen, is like single-handedly fights every battle you can imagine for Brooklyn for peace. She's relentless. Every day I get an email from her about something else, some other petition or something else to do. She connects you to everything. I really recommend for people to join Brooklyn for Peace, even if you don't live in Brooklyn, because they are awesome. And one of the reasons is, Charlotte, I stand in awe of you. You are a poem. You are an epic poem, Charlotte.
Can you send me the link of that group? I was just in Brooklyn at the Green Pavilion, for the poetry reading.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
please send me the link. And Alan Baxter, my publisher, wanted to show up today. He already got up early for an event, so he couldn't. And could you, Jackie, so I don't forget this, put him on your list for poetry Zooms in the future?
I think he is on my list.
Okay, he told me he didn't he didn't know about it. So somehow he didn't get the message.
Yeah, well, my list is imperfect.
That's so good.
There's many other things. Sarah, do you have a poem you'd like to read?
No, I don't have one, but I just wanted to thank all the poets and the imagery in Frank's poem, which was very long, but
Yeah,
really
sorry about that.
interesting. The imagery, I just kept on moving along from one set of images to another. It was wonderful, and I appreciated the other man from Oakland, from
Raymond.
Yes, Raymond, his poem also. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for being with us. Richard, do you have a poem for us? I know
We
you
can't see him either. I can't see him on my screen. I don't know what, maybe he.
hear us. Do you have a poem? Wait-vous. Wait-vous. He's French.
Il est
Wait-vous.
français. Alors, Richard. Richard, coucou. Vous êtes où?
Okay.
Coucou, Richard.
And
Richard Perron.
Zayed, you want to read a poem?
No, I don't have any poem, but I'm here to listen and to support.
And you're in Jordan, right?
I'm in New York, actually.
Oh, you're in New York now. Okay, all
Yeah.
right.
Ahlan wa sahlan Ziad. Let's get
أهلا
together someday, inshallah.
أهلا وسهلا فيك. Thank you. Thank you.
بنشوف
Yes,
بنشوف
sure.
إن شاء الله في نيويورك. أنا
Sure,
هون
إن شاء
واخد
الله.
شقر إن شاء الله.
Yeah, join Brooklyn for peace. Why not?
Yes.
Thank you. Oh,
Sure.
yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Workers need to get together, yeah, and support
Yes,
each other.
please.
I'm going to read a poem that Phil Hopper sent in. He said he might be busy, but it's by Sami Al-Qasim, and it's called Slit Lips. Slit Lips. And it goes, I would have liked to tell you the story of a nightingale that died. I would have liked to tell you the story had they not slit my lips.
That's big.
And
Wow.
do you have a poem you'd like to read? No, you're on mute. Okay. All right. Well, I have one. Some of you know I had a terrible burn a couple of years ago, right after returning from Jordan, and it made me think of Palestine. I was in the burn unit for a month or a month and a half, and then in rehab for a couple months. And I still have burn scars. Burns, there's nothing as bad as burns, man. I still have burn scars and it's been like over 5 years. And they itch or they pain or they hurt or they pull at any time of the day and night. I have no idea why. And burns are really awful. It's an awful injury to have. So this I wrote in the burn unit at New York Presbyterian Cornell Hospital, 27th of September, about a week after my burn. Surreal experience, burning, flames above, around me, excruciating pain, screaming, helpless, imprisoned by intangible flames. Put your hand through and around them, but you cannot grab it, hold it, or stop it. Horrible way to die. I think of the Palestinian family burned by settlers. The Jordanian pilot burned by ISIS Daesh. Syrians burned in bombings. Heretics burned over centuries. Saints burned. Witches burned. And I ask, how can humans do this to each other? The depravity of evil twists the soul. The spirit dies. And now
Nice.
I can't
Wow.
even watch anything burning on TV. It's just, too difficult for me.
I visited a family in Hebron, and I don't know, you heard about that incident where, Hebron's very intense, right? It's the biggest city in the West Bank in all of Palestine. And there's the Ibrahim Mosque with Ibrahim and Sarah and Isaac that are buried below it. And one synagogue, the synagogue next to the Ibrahim Mosque, just opposed one next to the other. There's a big settlement right in the middle. And Israeli soldiers and the settlers attack the Palestinians, throw stuff down. And their settlers have to stay a lot of time. The Palestinians have to stay in their house 24/7 because they're afraid if they leave, the settlers will take over. And the Israeli government will allow them to take their house just like that, done, and they're out, and there's no compensation. And I've met a family like that, and they showed me out the window the remnants of another home there right in the middle of the old city of Hebron that was burnt to a crisp. And he said settlers threw Molotov cocktails into their home, and people got out, and the baby stayed, and the baby burned and died.
Yeah. That was
I saw the whole place. I went, oh my God.
Been a number of babies and children that have been burned by settlers. And it's just, you know, whenever I read about it, hear about it, it just breaks my heart because I know how painful, it's a very painful death, you know, and it blows my mind that people can do this to each other. Hugh McGuire, welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Hi, would you like to read some poetry?
Can I pass?
I would.
I didn't come prepared with anything, but I do have a collection of poems that I
just
keep a file of.
Yeah, come on. We're this is very informal. And we'd love to hear one of your poems.
Oh, they're not. I know they're published poems that I keep a file of, and nothing that I've written.
Okay. What do you write any poetry about the situation in Palestine?
I've written an essay that I tried to get. Who is a fellow who runs Tikkun? My brain is just snapped. You know, Tikkun magazine?
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, Michael Lerner.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
And I couldn't elicit interest from him. I think, you know, I don't mean to be controversial, but I think Jewish people have to look at their own history and have to look at their attitude toward non-Jews. You know, it's easy for Jewish people to talk about how non-Jews have hurt them, but they never talk about how they've hurt non-Jews. And you know, the feudalism in Eastern Europe only ended with the First World War, and the Jewish people had feudal estates. They had rights. They were part of the top 5 or top 10% of income earners, and the peasants had nothing.
I think part of the problem also is that a lot of times when you write anything critical of Israel, that even Jews who might be sympathetic to Palestinians are afraid because of criticism.
That's right, and that's the problem that we're facing.
From their own community, because I know, like, I mean, almost all my friends in New York are Jews, and they all, you know, just like Netanyahu, and they're against the occupation and yada yada yada. But they're very reluctant, you know, to speak out because of the flack they'll get from families, from friends,
Right.
and it's kind of sad. But this what's kind of interesting is this event that just happened in Israel of the you know, the trampling of at that religious site in Mount.
Yeah, they were mostly from New Jersey and New York.
Yeah, and that now they're starting. They're afraid of the Orthodox Jews, you know, because of the block in Israel, and now the government realizes that because the Israeli government didn't stick to their guns about that this was not a safe place and this was not a safe
That's right.
gathering for large groups. For years, they've been warning them not to do it, but
Yeah.
because they're afraid of the Orthodox, they didn't do it. But now, as a result of this disaster, I think a lot of the secular Israeli Jews are looking at things differently and are realizing that they have to stand up to the Orthodox. But even there was an article in the Times about in New York, the Orthodox are becoming a voting bloc and are going to be a bloc, a political threat or a political influence. Because they vote as a bloc, you know, they do what the rabbi tells them to do.
Yeah.
This is going to be a
They're not becoming a voting bloc. They are. They block vote for one thing. Block voting is something that we underestimate We can all block vote. The people who live in condominium developments could block vote and, elect local officials who are sympathetic to the problems of condominium people. But no, the Orthodox Jews have been block voting for many, many decades, and they have an enormous amount of power as a result. They have their own. They elect their own state assemblyman in New York. They're online for Section 8. Most of them, many of them are on welfare of one kind or another. They're on the front of the line for Section 8 housing and all that. And so they're quick to want to get whatever public benefits are available, but they maintain an attitude of a people apart, and they have absolutely nothing to do with the larger community. And it's a problem. It's a problem here. It's a problem in Israel. They're a huge voting bloc in Israel.
Could I just say something? I don't know how many people on the this meeting are Jewish, but I am, and I have given up, alienated myself from almost all my family, and I never discuss, Israel except with people from JVP because I know they're going to be hostile to my views. So I can't even discuss it with my husband. So there are people like us, there may be, in the minority, and they're never going to be able to raise the money that Orthodox and conservative Jews raise to help Israel. They're never going to be able to raise that kind of money for their causes, but we exist, and you can't lump everybody together as a group, because I don't want to be in that group. I want to be in count with the people that think the way I do.
Yeah, it's a problem. I sympathize with that. It's an enormous problem. The horror that's being inflicted by the settlers on the Palestinians is just unconscionable, and they feel they can do it with impunity.
But also, I taught, and I had Israeli students, and I'm friendly with one who lives in this country. I helped get her, papers to live in this country. And she's married to a non-Jew, and she would never go back to Israel because I don't know that she would get into open conflicts with her family, but I've met them and they're against Bibi. And, there are even Israelis in this country who feel that way. It's a question, they don't have power.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know how this will end. What deeply saddens me is that everything that the right-wing Israelis are doing to the Palestinians, we did to the indigenous natives here, and we did it worse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the African Americans and a lot of ethnic groups, the Latinos.
Right.
My family is Italian American and partly Mexican.
That's right.
We need to change consciousness. But you're right. This is not just the Israelis doing ethnic cleansing. It's happened in the United States. Sometimes it's very hypocritical when it criticizes other countries for, like, China and what they do with their kids and stuff. And we need to clean up our own garden right here.
Oh, absolutely right.
I would agree with everything you gentlemen have said, except the we part. I exclude myself from that equation. Thank you very much.
Why?
Well, I'm going to start to gamble this summer because I live near the Shinnecock Reservation, out in Shinnecock and the Hamptons, and they're going to have rights to have a casino. And of course, this pisses off all of the very rich people in Southampton because their golf course overlooks, their land, which is certainly not, it's not impoverished, but it's certainly not anything they want to associate themselves with. And I'm going to go and gamble. I figure, great, if I can spend $25 a week on slots and they get money for it, terrific. I'll enjoy myself.
And the
Yeah,
rubbish.
Raymond, would you just explain what you just said, man? I mean, that resonated with me, what you said, but I'm not sure why.
Well, you said we,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm not a
yeah.
part of that equation. I'm not.
Okay.
Uh,
No, I'm saying
on-
we, I'm talking about my ancestors, my people like my African American, I lived in the ghetto, my African American friends and my
Yeah.
family. I didn't mean people here at this Zoom. I didn't include
No,
you,
no, I know
but I
that
understand what you're saying.
specifically,
You're
but
saying something. I think you're saying
yeah,
something. I want to hear what, if you
but
don't mind.
when you talk about the we, you know, we're
Yeah.
talking about a certain class of individuals, mostly Euro-American males of a certain wealth status and power status, you know, that, or the shot callers, the planners, the executioners, and so
Oh,
forth.
yeah.
They're the policymakers, and most of us, you know, like you talk about you having Italian roots or heritage, and even for the Jews on the call, you know, I have a question for the Italians, you know, and the Irish. When did the Irish become white? When did the Italians become white?
That was
And
after.
then lastly, when did the Jews become white? You see, you know, because that was a whole process that, you know, took place. And basically, whiteness is something that is in opposition to something else. And what is that something else? That something else is basically Africanness or Blackness or whatever the case may be. And so, you know, that project has always been in operation primarily as a mechanism for exploitation, but also a mechanism for dividing the working class, poor people's, you know, preventing them from coming together. You know, if you look at the South, you see the labor movement is always up against the disunity that is sown. You know, like if you even look at Bessemer recently with Amazon, you see. But anyway, that's a longer story, and I don't think this is the forum for that. But when I see you all in Manhattan, we'll have this conversation.
No, but no, what you're saying, literally, talk just about the color of skin. My father is Southern Italian. My mother's British American, so I'm much lighter.
Yeah.
He has the same type of education, you know, he's like an engineer and went to these top schools, but he had a whole different childhood just because his pigment of his skin was much darker. Not quite as dark as you, Raymond, but really close, to the extent that he had, you know, he had issues all over the place just because of the color of the skin.
Yeah.
But what I'm referring to basically is what's in our heart. And even though you cannot deny how people are prejudiced and ethnic cleansing just because their ethnic group or color of their skin, I'm trying to reach people's hearts and get empathy, like Jackie was having empathy for people who were burned, have empathy for people that are struggling, because Italians were simply in ghettos when they were treated like dirt when they got here, just like African Americans. There's integration, but it's true, they've integrated, and sort of the whiteness is like they've integrated, but still there's racism. And my Latino families, part of my family is Latino, and I have Jewish roots, but I kind of, you know, a lot of people don't know that, but I'm trying to get beyond just color, but I understand what you're saying, and you can't. But you know, it's interesting, just a little side note, folks, Cornell West and a lot of these African-American scholars put out this video. It's a powerful on YouTube, and it says something like this: as I see the Palestinians that look like us. And he makes that connection between the Palestinian suffering and the police brutality that a lot of our police are being trained in Israel, and the ethnic groups and the way African Americans are treated and the Palestinians are treated in a very similar way. Because it was in the beginning like an apartheid state in this country, and they're still in the South, man. Let's not sugarcoat things. Things have not evolved that much. When I was down in Mississippi, they haven't, and that's the reality that I found when I was there. I didn't know that until I was there. Thank you, man. We'll get together and we got more to talk about here.
Yeah, well,
Thank you, man.
just briefly, just the Palestinian situation is very much akin to the indigenous peoples' plight here, in terms of almost being eradicated, almost being, totally ethnically cleansed, from their own land, no less. As
Yeah.
far as us African peoples, we were brought here forcibly, and there was no, like when you talk about Black people, or well, one thing on any of these calls, if any of you ever use the term the slaves, I'm going to interject, because the so-called slaves, were Ashanti, Fulani, Mandingo, Hausa, on and on and on, and smushed together and became this thing called Black people here, or African Americans. So we have a different, our situation is a bit different, but the indigenous people here in the Palestinians situation is kind of, mirrors one another.
Can I ask you something? I know that the Irish, I can't answer exactly when they became, in quote, white, but they use politics as a way of getting power and integrating into society, because they were treated like garbage when they first came here. And don't you see, even though it's very slow, that there is a change in the politics in this country, that there are so many people of color who have, been elected to positions in government. I mean, am I wrong in thinking that there's been a change, and that even though it may be slow, that will be a route to power for people of color?
Oh, is that directed to me?
Yeah, anyone who wants to answer.
Does anyone else want to take? I can say something if no one else is jumping at the bit.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, granted, every change is a change. There's quantitative changes and there are qualitative changes, and there are these quantitative changes whereby you have these elected officials, and sometimes they can enact policies that are beneficial and improve the basic conditions of people's lives, in people's lives. Like my mom, for example, was one of the founders of a medical school in Los Angeles, and also a hospital, Martin Luther King Jr. General Hospital. So those are definitely things that improve people's material conditions. However, in the long haul, I think there's a it requires a more fundamental change to better people's lives. And I think what we're looking at is a system of exploitation in place that basically is running its course, and it has to be put in the museum. And because, how do you have 80% or 70% of the people wanting single payer universal health care, and in a pandemic, and then you have the executive telling you that if it passes the House of Representatives, 430 some people, and then it passes the Senate with 100, and it gets to his desk, he's going to veto it. How does that happen? How do two people like Mitch McConnell and this Joe Manchin, and how can they hold up legislation that is beneficial to people? So what I'm getting at is that there has to be a more fundamental change. Granted that people can make a difference, like the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes and the Talibs and the Ilhan Omars and Cori Bushes can make a difference, and Jamar Bowman, they can make a difference, but those differences are tiny and incremental, and we need so much more right now. And let me just tack on an addendum, is that as far as the police murders of African American that are just almost weekly, which almost kind of mimic the Palestinian situation, that is only going to be changed with the abolition of that violent police forces and so forth.
But you know, I see this country, and I just want to say this one thing that relates to what you said. I see the United States in almost a civil war death struggle. I think that, you know, the United States is very divided, and there are people who, you know, almost 50% of the people who want change and 50% of the people who just want it to be old white men ruling. So we're in a struggle, and it's fluid.
Yes. May I interject a few thoughts? It goes back to the history of this country. This country was founded by wealthy people for wealthy people. For the first 40 years or so, working class white males couldn't vote. And it's not that they didn't want the vote, but the electors who had to have a substantial amount of property just wouldn't permit it. And they felt that working class people didn't have the education, they didn't have the judgment, they didn't have all the things that the upper class felt separated them from everybody else and made them superior people. And then all the immigration started in the 1830s. It wasn't until the 1830s that white working class males were first given the right to vote, and that was in the Andrew Jackson administration. And that's what developed nativism and the know-nothings, who tried to suppress the political machines that were actually developing prosperity for uneducated working class people. You know, you could go to your local district leader and with your problems, and he would do something to try to help you. That's the first time that happened in this country. But nativism has never left us, and what people are afraid, the draft riot in 1863. You know, in 1863, Lincoln signed 2 pieces of legislation. One was the Emancipation Proclamation. The other was the draft law. And the draft law allowed wealthy people to buy their way out. You could bring in a substitute for yourself, and it left the people being drafted as the poor, and the poor were mostly the ethnics in the cities. And so when Lincoln started to redefine the purpose of the Civil War as not being to just preserve the Union, but to free the slaves, these uneducated working class ethnic people saw the slaves as one more competition. The Irish were working for nothing, and the blacks were willing to work for less than that.
Let me ask you to refer to the African people as formerly enslaved people, because they weren't slaves. They were Hausa, Mandingo, Fulani, Ashanti, and all that kind of business. They weren't slaves, you know, enslaved. They were enslaved people. Formerly,
I accept that. That's true.
Thank you.
The consequence is that if you studied the history of the 1850s, this country came very close to just falling apart. And we ended up fighting a civil war. And the intensity with which that war was fought to preserve enslavement was just an amazing thing to behold. And here we are today, fighting the same issues.
Yeah, what you were saying, I didn't even think of that. But wasn't it true? You responded to this because I'm not sure. But even to vote in those days, you had to have land. So that
Well,
sort of confirms what you were saying
That's right.
about the rich. This country was pretty well controlled and formed for the rich,
That's right.
as
And so when we
opposed to
talk
the
about,
enslaved
we
people,
talk
as
about
Reagan said.
Israel, and
Yeah.
and there was James John Winthrop, the city on the hill, the light of liberty for the whole world. And so when we talk about Israel and what the Zionists are doing to the Arabs, God, I cringe with the hypocrisy that I feel, because our putative ancestors, I mean, my people came here in the 1920s, but all the white people, the Irish who were able to get out of New York with all the discrimination that was thrown at them, and were able to get to the West Coast, did the same thing to the Chinese that was done to them here. Incredible. We haven't learned anything.
The issue of a basic psychological problem, a sociological problem, where groups who feel oppressed have to find somebody under them to make them feel better, so that each ethnic group that came in was demeaned and treated as subhuman, and then they felt the need to treat the next group the same way, so they would feel better. Yeah. And I explains the poor whites of the South. You think of Mississippi and Kentucky, people voting for these terrible GOP politicians when they have the highest maternal infant rate, death rate, they have the highest poverty, highest unemployment and all that, and they're still voting for these jerks because they need to feel superior over blacks, over African Americans. What's interesting is May 1st was May 1st, right? And I played, I do a prayer thing, and I played the Joe Hill song that was sung by Paul Robeson, and then an American thing. And what's so moving about that song is that Joe Hill was assassinated. He was a union organizer, but the whole point of the song is that he didn't die. That good ideas and justice does not die, and it's a struggle, but it through good people it continues despite all the horrible things that they endure, including death. By the way, here's a picture of Ibrahim al-Hawi. Can you all see it?
Yeah.
Yep.
This is Ibrahim al-Hawi, and I have I think a picture. This is the view from his house at night over Jerusalem.
Wow.
And this is the table, and everybody's sitting around down on the table, eating and talking in the kitchen in the back, where his wife would cook lovely stuff for us, or Ibrahim would cook. It's a big table. It's like 10 people usually sitting around, and these are the beautiful views from his house over the Mount of Olives and over Jerusalem. So and this is the room I had. I had my room to myself too, Frank. I engineered that. And it's just a wonderful place, and he's a really great guy.
On a clear day, they say, I've never seen, they say on a clear day from his place, you can actually see Jordan, the Dead Sea or something. Which have you done? I've never seen it, but I was told that.
There's places in Amman that you can see Jerusalem at night on a clear day. It's only 60 miles.
It's not that far.
Yeah. So I want to thank everybody for.
Thank you.
I think it was really interesting. And just one little anecdote. I'm part Italian also, and Sicilian grandfather, very dark skin, kinky hair, dark skin. Sounds like your father. And he always had a lot of shit because of. But my mother was more fair because my grandmother was Northern Italian, so we were more fair. And my mother's last name, she graduated top of her class magna cum laude, City College in economics. She was the first woman in the economics department. Very smart lady.
Wow.
And this is in the 40s when, it was tough at City University. And she tried to get a job when she graduated. And because her last name was Italian, Patata, she was Sicilian. She couldn't.
Wow.
So she married my father and became a tailor right away. She got so
in the 30s, they used to advertise jobs and they would say, it didn't even get down to color. They would say only blue-eyed applicants need apply.
Yeah.
I know my brother-in-law was looking for, a job then, and he didn't fit the bill.
Can I just say one final thing? I was at a discussion on Israel-Palestine many years ago, more than a decade ago now. And I expressed my point of view, and a Jewish guy came up to me after the discussion was over, and we chatted. And he wasn't hostile or anything. He was very intrigued by what I was saying, and he looked at me at one point and he said, "How would you solve this?" And that stopped me cold, because I spent a career with the nonpartisan research staff of a state legislature, and if a legislator came up to you, you would ask a question like that of a partisan staffer. But if a legislator asked a partisan staffer what position he should take on this issue, the partisan staffer would look at who finances his campaign, who his supporters are in his district, what the views of his leadership in the legislature are, and all the communities that this legislator reports to. And then based on those views, then that staffer would write a position paper that would fit in to all those perspectives. It's not a normative question. It's not a question of good or bad or right and wrong. It's people trying to protect themselves, taking a view that isn't going to cause them to be alienated or ostracized or worse, like what happened to Stephen Salation. And it's a very difficult problem, and we have to think about what ways can we resolve this. And it's not just saying there are good guys and bad guys. It's far more complex than that.
The Aboriginals and Native Americans have a tradition, and also in Africa. I lived in Africa for many years in the Peace Corps. Actually, I have 4% African DNA in me. Thanks, I found out from Ancestry.com, probably from my Sicilian grandfather. But they have a tradition of just putting people together and having them stay until they resolve a solution. That's a very ancient traditional method of dispute resolution that the Aboriginals have used successfully for thousands of years. The Native Americans used it. Many other cultures use it. And I often thought of just locking up, really together and make them, as many issues as you may have about the validity of the state of Israel, there are thousands and thousands of people born there and whose lives are there, and you can't vaporize them. What are you gonna? You can't kill them all off. You can't vaporize them. And the same with the Palestinians. The Palestinians have lived there thousands of years. You can't vaporize them and get rid of them. But that's the position that both governments, both peoples have, is they just want to get rid of the other. Yeah. But it's not going to happen, no matter what your point of view is. The reality is they're there, and you have to figure out a way that there could be some kind of resolution. Just lock them up together and make them work out some kind of mutual deal. And I think it's possible, because I know from the Palestinians and a lot of Israeli and Palestinian friends, they would be very happy to have some kind of solution worked out. Most of the Palestinians know the Israelis are not going to go away. many of them make money from the Israelis, and actually, they're both Semites. When I was teaching at NYT in Amman, Jordan, I had students, and there were always some students that were very hardworking. They got the top of the class. Their families were pushing them. They came from big business families. I said, God, you guys are just like Jews. And I found out they were Palestinians. And I said, God, they are so similar in their cultures. And I thought, and then I heard that there was some Israeli firms, electronic firms, who had set up work and they were going to make tons of money. And they hired Indian and Pakistanis to work, but they just didn't work out. They ended up firing the East Asians and hiring Palestinians who worked out perfectly with them because they understood each other and they got along. So I have hopes when, Frank knows too, when you go there, there are all these fanatics that just want to, hate and kill Arabs and that kind of stuff. But there are a lot of Israelis who are very anxious for a peace solution and who don't hate Arabs. They marry each other. There's a lot of sex. A lot of sex that goes on between Jews and Arabs. Let me tell
That's
you.
what it is.
And
have more sex.
Yeah, I mean,
my wife is Jewish.
Ah, okay, there you go. So maybe that's the solution. I just give
Make love, not war.
But we have to believe in hope because the Palestinians aren't going away and the Israelis aren't going away. So we got to figure out some way of reconciliation, and maybe they should import Aboriginals and make them go there and have them. I have a friend of mine from Australia who's been saying that for years, that they send Aboriginals there and have them set up meetings and make them work stuff out.
But somebody has to be willing to compromise, and nobody is at this point.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
Because
the
really money off of the war. People are making money off of the conflict, please. All the surveillance that's being sold by American and the weapons. They're making profits from the conflict. That's why it's not ending.
The Israeli relatives that I had, the women that I knew, they said not one Palestinian or Israeli's child's life is worth a piece of land. Nothing. They didn't want to see their children die. They didn't want to see Palestinian children die. They, their mothers, they wanted peace.
That was Lily Rivlin's point of her film. So maybe we should get rid of the men and let the women rule. Although I don't know. I went to all women's schools, and women are not angels when they're in charge of things.
No, we don't need a Clinton. We don't need a Thatcher, but yeah, maybe it's an idea.
I don't know. Well, God bless you all. I think that, whenever we do one of these things, we put a good energy into the cosmos. I really believe the power of thought and creativity and energy and discussion. So we're part of the healing. So what we do today is really part of the healing. And I thank you for joining with and I look forward to seeing you next week. Okay.
Oh, thank you. How will I know? Will I get an email?
I send email every week. Are you on the email list?
I guess so. I'm on Tom Cox's email list.
You get it through. Oh, you're you. Ah, you're the Hugh who's just recent.
Yes.
Right. Oh, you are. Okay. Oh, you're awesome too. This guy is awesome. He's sending emails all the time. It's great. Yeah, I was wondering, who is this guy? He's like really.
That's me.
Great.
Oh, so if I'm on his list, I'll get it from you.
Yeah, I sent it to BFP. I sent it to their group, and everybody gets it in the group. Sharp. So
thank you.
Okay, God bless everybody.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you, man.
Thank you so much. And,
Thank you, guys.
really wonderful group. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ahlan wa sahlan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Okay. Ma salama.
Ma salama.
Ma salam.